Hello and welcome to this illustrated podcast with me, David Ingram.
And me, Oliver Marvin.
This illustrated podcast is briefly looking at the history of editing. We will look at the differences between the old and new editing styles and techniques.
And exploring how the origins of editing have influenced future generations of editors.
The general meaning of the word edit is very simple. The principle of condensing and or modifying something, in this case, feature films.
There was once a time when films were left unedited, containing a single, long and static shot. These films wouldn't have contained much of a narrative, and would have simply shown something like a city street or people working.
The sequence would stop when the camera ran out of film, but filmmakers weren't happy with this. They wanted more freedom to tell the stories they were trying to capture on film. Back in the early days of cinema, the Lumiere brothers were French inventors and pioneer manufacturers of photographic equipment, who devised an early motion picture camera, which was also a projector, called the cinematograph, which the word cinema is derived from this exact name. And from this point onwards, after the Luminere's invention, motion pictures began to grow as the 20th century began through the early 1900s up to the 1920s, where Hollywood was in its prime with the silent movie era before moving into the talkie era. The Great Train Robbery is a 1903 American silent short film in the Western genre. It was written, produced, directed, all by Edwin Porter, a former Edison Studios cameraman. The film itself was only 12 minutes long in length. As you can see here's an example of the early filmmaking that was to inspire a generation of filmmakers to come. Now, the editing here may be very basic, but as we go through the years, the editing improves dramatically, all the way up to the 21st century right now. The film The Great Train Robbery, considered a milestone film in the making, it expanded on Porter's previous work, which included a film called Life of an American Fireman, and the film used a number of unconventional techniques. This included composite editing and various other techniques, including cross-cutting. In 1898, the film Come Along Do was released, directed and produced by a British filmmaker called Robert W. Paul.
The film in question was about a couple looking at a statue while eating their lunch together. It only contained two shots, connected by a single cut.
This was one of the first films to use more than one angle to cut between. This meant the story could be shown in a more realistic way, showing the characters' actions in a fluid motion as if they were happening in real time.
One of the first film editors was Margaret Booth, an American who started editing films in 1915 as a patcher for D.W. Griffith's films. She had a vast career in editing, as well as writing, producing, and other editorial jobs.
Before her, the role was referred to as a cutter or film joiner, depending on what they were doing with the footage originally. But Irving Thalberg then decided to create the term editor.
Unlike editors on films today, an editor such as Booth wouldn't have worked with the director at all. Even years after Booth's debut in editing, when directors had more and more influence on the edit, she was quoted saying that she preferred directors to stay out of the cutting room entirely.
Originally, women were left to edit films until it was seen as a desirable field of work for men to earn a living in the film industry.
Women were originally chosen as they were seen to be more creative.
Yes, that's very right, Oliver. And of course, from that point on, that's all we got to say about the basics of history of editing from its early beginnings. But moving on to editing technologies, these are just a few different examples. So to begin with, when films were being put together, or patched as they were known, the film would have to be physically cut with scissors and pasted together with some special glue by hand.
By 1924, this was soon a thing of the past, with the introduction of machines which spliced and threaded the film to provide a much more clean and precise cut between each shot.
An example of this was the Moviola, a machine which was used with film editors so they could see the film as they were editing it and cutting it, and it went through the strip section as Oliver just explained. It was invented by a Netherlands-born man called Ewan Surya in 1924.
Today, most feature films are edited digitally through editing software such as Adobe Premiere Pro, Avid Liquid, or Final Cut Pro, and sometimes even something as simple as Windows Movie Maker.
Oh yes, that old classic old editing software. The introduction of digital filmmaking has only been around since roughly around the 1990s, and such films, mostly animation, including Pixar's Toy Story in 1995, completely edited through a computer system, and everything was digitalized rather than using any aspects of film at all. So feature films prior to this date were shot on film and edited through the film prints known as the film work print, or cutting copy as it was known in the UK.
An edit decision list, or an EDL, was formed with the physical print itself. Nowadays, the EDL and shots themselves are stored on an external hard drive to act as a backup. These clips can be edited, but if a mistake is made, because it is a digital copy, the shot can be retrieved, unlike film in the 20th century, which was once cut, it would be final. A reshoot would be needed unless there was a spare copy of the prints made.
The Technicolor process was a long yet satisfying process. It delivered high quality, for the time it was made anyway, images in colour. Films including The Wizard of Oz 1939,
Singing in the Rain 1952,
and West Side Story 1961 all used the Technicolor process to dazzle the audience with the amazing advent of colour. Hollywood cinema was just introducing it in the 1930s/40s, and then it picked up from there.
Colour correction is used as a post-production technique. It can be used to change the colour of something and make it appear to be brighter or match up to a previous shot.
And particularly films that were filmed in the Technicolor process, which have been re-enhanced with such technology as Blu-ray, have benefited from its rich colorization. Now, of course, back then, the colours you had on screen would be the colours you had forever through to the final cut. Whereas now, if there's any dull, sort of unbalanced lighting or shirt colours or anything that's in the shot, you can just recolor it with a little bit of a post-production magic skill.
Techniques such as jump cuts are used to great effect in both 20th and 21st century cinema. An example of this is in the 1968 Stanley Kubrick film, 2001: A Space Odyssey. The jump cut from the bone being thrown into the air to the spaceship in the future.
This sequence is still just as effective today as the cuts made in many films that we see on our cinema screens in the modern day, such as Matthew Vaughan's 2004 British crime thriller Layer Cake with Daniel Craig, in which we seamlessly transition from shot to shot. So it's not a traditional jolty jump cut, it's quite smooth and progressive as we go through.
Another example of excellent editing is in Hot Fuzz, part of the Cornetto trilogy. This has quick, fast-paced editing used to make the scene far more exciting. This is used very well at the end, in which it's the final scene where they arrest all the villagers. They don't stay on the cut for very long, as they are able to keep the audience interested. Montage editing is the method of using a selection of clips in a quick, fast-paced cut to show the passing of time. The first known montage is in the Soviet Union film Battleship Potemkin. The 1925 film is a silent film directed by Sergei Eisenstein and produced by Mosfilm. It was even named the greatest film of all time at the Brussels World Fair in 1958. Probably the most well-known montage is that from Rocky III, starring and directed by Sylvester Stallone. The 1982 movie has one of probably the most well-known montages, often referred to as the fight montage. So, who knows where editing will be in the future, and where the next cut will be?
Goodbye for now, everyone.
No, don't end it on the cut.